both members of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Irina is an international working group member of Youth Rise, which is a youth-led drug policy organization, and she has also served as the chairwoman for Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and is on the board of directors for the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation as their chief of staff. In DC, she volunteered with HIPS, driving an outreach van in the middle of the night, and got to witness firsthand the human effects of the drug war. A year ago, she moved to the Bay Area and now works as an outreach coordinator for homeless youth in San Francisco. She's also involved in psychedelic harm reduction work, volunteering at Burning Man with the Full Circle Tea House and the Zendo. Daniel Jabbour is the founder of the Psychedelic Society of San Francisco. Prior to living in SF, he founded a similar organization in New York City. In college, Daniel also founded a chapter of Students for Sensible Drug Policy and has been active with SSDP ever since. He was on a Drug Policy Alliance committee working to end New York City's marijuana arrest epidemic and has spoken on several panels for NORML and SAFER in New York City. His previous political work also includes lobbying at the local level for a mayoral candidate in Hoboken, New Jersey. And when he's not hacking on drug policy, he's a lead engineer at a San Francisco-based startup and mentors young hackers at Hack the Future. So please give a big round of applause for Daniel and Irina. They've got a very riveting and revealing tag team presentation for us. Let's give it up.
Oh, just to clarify really quick, before the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation gets after me, I was the chief of staff there, not on their board of directors. So, that's it.
Just in case. Cool. Welcome, everybody.
Should we use this? You guys hear some? Should we use the mic?
Yeah, for the video.
Cool. Yeah, welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. I know the BART strike makes it hard to travel. We're really excited to do this talk. It's our first time with some new material, so please give us the benefit of the doubt, but hopefully it's awesome. So let's get started. Cool. So the first thing we're going to do is a little exercise. Irina is going to be our note taker here. So fortunately we have a whiteboard, yes. So the first thing I want to do is, especially with this audience, we thought this would be a fun exercise. What comes to mind when you guys think about people that use LSD? You know, what sort of words come to your head about why people use LSD? Or what do you call somebody who uses LSD?
Awake.
Awake. Cool.
A tripper.
Tripper.
Psychonaut.
Psychonaut. Don't be shy.
Artist.
What did I hear?
Artist.
Artist. Person. Oh dear.
Eccentric.
Eccentric. I like it.
Deadhead.
Deadhead. Did I hear hippie? No?
Hippie?
Hippie.
Space traveler.
Space travel.
Acid head.
Acid head.
Freak.
Freak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Space cadet.
What do you think, Irina? Should we keep probing them?
Space traveler? Yeah.
It's a pretty good list. So what about people who use crack?
Crackhead.
Crackhead.
Space traveler.
Oh, guys. Being silly. Seriously, like, what do we hear people call crack users?
Tweakers.
Tweakers. Daddy. Addicts. Junkies.
Fiend.
What was that?
Fiend.
Fiend. Yeah. Dope fiend. Any others? Did we get crackhead? Yeah, that was the first one. All right.
Oftentimes black, right?
Yeah.
Hobo.
Or
Desperate. I think we got a pretty good list.
So basically, before I start talking about the war on drugs, I like talking about the drugs, just to kind of get us all on the same page. And I've been thinking a lot about Maslow's hierarchy recently, especially since I've been working with people who are usually more on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in case some of you don't know, this is kind of, this theory that we all kind of progress through life in all these different stages of needs. So there's the bottom, basic, everyone needs food and shelter and sleep, all the stuff that we need to be human, right? And then you get closer to the top, and something that I've been thinking about recently is the fact that drugs can kind of be put into Maslow's hierarchy, right? So if you think about people who use LSD and all of the words that are associated with that, you can probably most of the time assume that they're looking for something that's closer to self-actualization, that's closer to the top of the hierarchy. We don't take acid going, okay, I really don't have a place to sleep, I'm really hungry, I'm going to take acid to forget about it. Most of the time, if you try to forget things on acid, they come up. On the other hand, you might take some heroin to forget about the fact that you're really cold and starving and sleeping on the street. So it seems like what we tend to do in society is we tend to judge people for their drug use based on where they are in the hierarchy, right? If people are all the way on the bottom, then they're dirty crackheads, tweakers, addicts, junkies. And if they're closer to the top, then they're awake, they're trippers, they're psychonauts, they're artistic. They're like really striving to be this bigger, better person. So just something to keep in mind as we go into this whole drug war business.
So now we're going to take a step back and chat a little bit about some drug war facts. We won't get too much into statistics, but there's a few fun charts here that tell a story that we'd like to share with you. The first is that America is the jailingest country in the world. Number one. We're used to being number one in a lot of things, or at least we like to think we are. And when it comes to prison populations, we are number one so much by far, it's crazy. The US has more people in prison just for drug offenses alone than all of Western Europe does for all offenses combined. We are the number one incarcerator in the world, and it's kind of crazy. And the cost of this is astronomical, both in human lives and in dollars.
Now, 1 in every 106 white males aged 18 or older is incarcerated. 1 in 106. That's a lot. That's a lot of people incarcerated. If you dig a little deeper, you'll find that 1 in every 36 Latino males aged 18 or older is incarcerated. 1 in every 36. That's like the size of a high school class, right? 1 in every 15 black males aged 18 or older is incarcerated. That's where we're at. And with the work that I do with homeless youth, a lot of times we work with gang-affiliated Latino youth, and we work with a lot of young black males who are unstably housed. And if we don't see them for a while, the first thing that we do is we check the jail list, and the second thing that we do is we check the hospitals nearby. And most of the time they're in jail. We actually just recently got jail clearance, and just watching these cycles happen over and over. We see them out on the street, we'll talk to them, we'll connect with them, and the next day they're gone and they're in jail. And this just keeps happening over and over and over again. Because there's really not much else for people to do once they have a criminal record.
And then, why are people in jail? I mean, we're talking about being the jailingest country in the world. What's driving that? Well, by and large, it's drugs. As this chart shows, the number of prisoners in federal prison for drug offenses exceeds even the next 2 or 3 offenses combined, which I don't know if you can read that, but it's drugs is the first bar there, followed by weapons, explosives, arsons, followed by immigration-related offenses, followed by sex-related offenses, and so on down the line into the more violent offenses, and just astronomically, an order of magnitude of difference in the number of people behind bars for drug offenses, and it's really fueling an epidemic of prison population. Especially actually in communities like you're working with, Irina, where it's just the norm. I mean, if 1 in every 15 males in your community is behind prison, you intimately know brothers and friends and cousins, and a good percentage of your, entire social network is, behind jail or behind bars in jail. And I mean, think of the ravage and the effect that has on the community. It's really just quite staggering.
Yeah, I think it's so common, in fact, that a lot of the times my clients tend to refer to being locked up as, oh, I was on vacation, oh, I just had to take a little break, I got locked up, I got taken away. It's just so commonplace because people have criminal histories and then they try to find a job and nobody will take them. And when nobody will take them, what do? Well, they start selling drugs. Because it's easy, you can make some money, you gotta make a living. And out here in San Francisco especially, where housing is so hard to get and everything is so expensive, that's sometimes the only thing that people can do. And they're specifically targeted based on that and based on their looks and their race and their age and locked up over and over and over again.
So, we've talked about, we have huge prison populations. The majority of those prisoners are people of color. So that would lead you to the assumption that, well, that must mean that people of color use drugs more than white people, right? In fact, that's quite the false assumption. And from these charts here, we can see that the number of drug users that are African Americans is about 13%, which is about the number of African Americans in our society. So it pretty much lines up. White people use drugs about the same, if not more so, according to some studies, than African American people. Yet, disproportionately, if we look at the prisoners, we can see that more than half of inmates are African American, and it's just totally disproportionate to go from 13% of the population to 60% of the prison population is just staggeringly awful. And really obvious. And actually, if we had taken this graph 10 years ago, that white percentage there, which is 25%, would have been much smaller. And the reason that that's growing for kind of the first time in a long time is being fueled by the meth epidemic in our country, where for the first time we're starting to see the drug war shift from being a war on blacks and on Latinos to being a war on the poor. And it's becoming a classist war, and we're starting to see the percentage of white prisoners increase as a result. Do you want to read this one?
Sure. So, this is an actual quote from basically the person who was the first drug czar. This is right before the Office of National Drug Control Policy existed. And this is a serious quote. Yeah, I'm just going to read it. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz and swing, result from marijuana usage. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others.
Yes.
Yep. So this is why the war on drugs started. It was just a way to say, well, you're doing this bad thing, I can't arrest you for being who you are, but I can pretend to arrest you for doing something else that everyone else is actually doing, but I'm just going to target you specifically because you're an other and we can throw you into jail and lock you up.
Yeah, I think the staggering thing here is that just as Jim Crow had been a successor system to slavery, when the drug war was started, in the 30s, when cannabis was first made illegal, it was really a successor system to Jim Crow. And like Irina said, it was, okay, so it's unconstitutional to arrest you for being black, but let's find something that we can associate with that, cohort of the population, arrest them for that, and only target enforcement on, people of color. And, just historically, the drug war has always been about subjugation and about control. And at first it was an extension of Jim Crow. In modern times, it is now, like we talked about, a war on the poor and on the underprivileged. I think this was a great cartoon that we've seen again and again that really helps depict that. There's so much going on here.
And you can see a good example, a bad example of this happening right now at 16th and Mission. There's this whole campaign to clean up 16th and Mission at the BART station, where there are cops standing there from 7 a.m. until 2 a.m. every single day. And what that's done to our outreach route is it's really impacted it, because suddenly everyone who used to be there is now spread out and doesn't have a place to go. And whereas before they were there just doing their thing and living and sleeping and being human, now the cops came in, started targeting people just for little minor drug offenses and started throwing everyone in jail and cleaning it up. That's actually what it's called. As opposed to maybe helping people find housing, they're tossing them away. So that some big buildings can be created and, yeah, gentrification.
So, the drug war is coming at an incredible cost, to the number of people behind bars, to communities that are ravished by the war on drugs, to the cost to taxpayers. And if we look at that spending, we've spent over $1.5 trillion on enforcement since the drug war started. This chart charts drug spending since, for the last 40 years or so, since Nixon started the war on drugs. And obviously the amount of money spent on enforcement has just skyrocketed. And this number doesn't even take into account the cost of the prisoners in the penal system, or all of the other costs associated in public health, and there's all of these secondary costs, not just on enforcement, but just on enforcement alone and propaganda. We spent $1.5 trillion. And let's do a cost-benefit analysis for a second and think about is this helping curb addiction in any meaningful way? Well, in fact, that blue line there is the US addiction rate over the last 40 years. And unfortunately, the percentages are getting cut off, but it's about under 2% there. And that's pretty much been a consistent number of the population has exhibited substance dependence. And social anthropologists have looked at this over much longer periods of time and seen that it's about that number. It just doesn't seem to change. And there's been some swells and some dips there in the crack epidemic and this and that, but they aren't the sort of dramatic shifts that the media would have you think they are when they talk and report about drug epidemics. So yeah, this chart just really sums up the hypocrisy and the ridiculousness of the cost-benefit of the drug war. Just amazing to me. Yeah, and if I could just go into the Oreo thing really quickly. So there was this news story recently about how Oreos may be as addictive as cocaine. And if you just go forward one more, there's this quote in it that basically these findings suggest that high-fat sugar foods and drugs of abuse trigger brain addictive processes to the same degree and lend support to the hypothesis that maladaptive eating behaviors are contributing to obesity can be compared to drug addiction. And we thought this was an interesting corollary. Just because the drug war really is trying to solve an issue that is not going to be solved by bullets and by spending on enforcement, just like it would be ridiculous to try to incarcerate people for having Oreos. To draw these parallels, which doctors and the medical professional field does all the time, drug policy is really not by itself a thing. You can't control drugs without thinking about how drugs impact the rest of our policy in our society. And to talk about reducing the harms that drugs cause, we have to think of it as a public health issue, because it is. And that's really what we saw from this.
The war on drugs is just completely illogical. It defeats all logic. It totally does not make any sense whatsoever. And like Daniel was saying, if we were to treat any other thing that's more addictive even than drugs in our society the same way, we would have even less money than we do now, which I'm not even sure if that's possible. But if a lot of people die from cars. Does that mean we make cars illegal? Does that mean we don't help people who get into car accidents? I don't know. There are some people that say no, but. So that's kind of the policy end of things. There's a lot more that we could have gone into and a lot deeper stuff that we could have really shine light on, but let's get into the human impact a little bit. And to do this, we just picked a couple of cases of people who have been really directly impacted by the drug war.
So the first case we want to share with you, many people in the room may know Oshan, so this is a tough topic to talk about. He was a good friend. He was a community organizer. He operated a tea house in the Mission, and he really serviced the community and felt compelled to help those around him, which makes this so much sadder. Oshan, of course, we can see is white, and was convicted of selling psychedelics. He was allegedly in a situation where he sold psychedelics to an informant and was set up, and it was a pretty cut and dry case. And he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Imagine spending the next decade of your life behind bars for selling, a few, a small amount of drugs that could fit in your hand. It's crazy to think about that someone could spend a decade behind bars for possessing and transferring such a small quantity of something that, as we said earlier, is helping awake people. So it's really incredibly sad. But at the same time, I think a lot of us in the community were surprised by this outcome. We don't see in today, in 2013, we don't see that many members of the psychonaut community going to jail for decade-plus long sentences. Of course, this was commonplace in the 60s. But, I really think that they were trying to make an example of him. And this was kind of the worst case.
And as absolutely horrible as that is, here's another case. Clarence Aaron was a college scholarship football player in Louisiana. He was black, as you can see, too. And he introduced someone to a crack dealer and got 3 life sentences and 20 years in prison. And has already served 20 years in prison. His family has tried to receive an executive pardon from the president so many times now, and every time it's been denied. In fact, President Obama has actually pardoned less people than any other president in American history. So that's something to think about. When I worked at the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, I spoke with his cousin and with his mom, and they were just so devastated. His mom has a hard time getting out of bed every single morning. She just has lost hope. What would you do if your son introduced someone and then was thrown into prison for 3 life sentences? It's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, I would just like to maybe add on that point that, this is not even a unique example. It's not like we had to dig super hard to find these rare cases of people's lives being ruined literally for talking. Clarence didn't possess, didn't transfer, didn't sell, didn't buy a drug. And, he risks dying in prison for speaking. And that, to me, just blows my mind. And, it wasn't the Criminal Justice Policy, who maintains that list of, right, Sentencing Project, I think that's what it's called. And you can just go on this site, and we did some research for this talk, and see...
The Innocence Project.
Innocence Project, sorry, yes. Just hundreds and hundreds of cases like this, of just total atrocities, caused by the drug war. It's just so not unique. And President Obama has a stack of pardon applications that any one of us in this room, I think any rational person would have granted. And it's crazy to think that Obama has been so lackadaisical on drug policy. Really, there's, I think, only one positive thing he's done for drug policy, and we'll talk about that later.
So really quickly, just to kind of go over where we are in California right now, bringing it home. Some of the drug policies that we have here, the Good Samaritan Law, does anyone know about that? Justin?
So that's you can be charged if you don't help people.
So that's the opposite. You won't be charged if
Oh, okay.
you do help people. So basically what it's saying is it's a law that in an overdose, if you try to help someone, then neither you nor the person who overdosed will be charged for possessing a small amount of drugs. So that's a policy that just recently passed here, and it's the thing with policy that's really difficult is that you can get a lot of financial support for passing a policy, but after it's passed, it's really hard to get financial support to get the policy out. And the policy doesn't really work if people don't know about it. So, but basically, if someone's ODing, there's a lot of hesitation around calling for help because people are afraid of getting busted themselves. They're afraid of their friend getting busted and then getting pissed off at them. And with this, we can now safely and soundly call people. And if you just have a little bit of substance on you, then you won't get charged. We have a lot of syringe exchange places in California, which is amazing. It's not like that in every state at all. A lot of times people have to go into Walgreens and pretend that they're diabetic, and people will still say no. And they'll have to reuse the same needle over and over and over again for months and months. We have naloxone here, which is a drug that can be used when someone is overdosing from opiates, and it comes in actually nasal spray form here too, and anyone can get a prescription for it and then save someone's life. There's harm reduction therapy here, harm reduction oriented practices, which basically means meeting someone where they're at and not saying, you need to stop using drugs are bad, abstinence only, sobriety only. It's a system of really talking to people and seeing where they are and how they can be supported even if they are using drugs. At the same time, we also have a 3 strikes law, which is basically for certain offenses, if you get 3 strikes on your record, and there are some strikeable offenses, violent and serious strikeable offenses. If you get 3, then you're in prison for the rest of your life. And then we still have the death penalty. So there's some pluses and minuses to living in California.
Also on the syringe exchange fact, just if I could add really quickly, like Irina said, a lot of states don't allow syringe exchanges to operate. Also, not every state has open access. California in 2012 finally passed open access, so addicts can walk, or anybody, not just addicts, anybody can walk into a Walgreens or pharmacy now and purchase syringes over the counter without the need for a prescription or anything like that. But California only did that in 2012. In New York, we did that, gosh, I think decades ago now. It's been around for a long time. And the year that it passed in New York, we saw something like a 50% reduction rate in new hepatitis cases that year. So this is like one of the most important policies from a public health perspective at spreading or at reducing the spreading of communicable diseases. The number one thing driving new HIV cases in America is it's not sex related, it's drug related at this point, and we really need to tackle that.
And just to keep in mind too, California does not have legalized marijuana. I know it kind of feels like it sometimes with all the smoke in the air, but just to point out, any amount with the intent to distribute is still a felony. It's still a felony with an incarceration period of 16 months to 3 years. And, we're still not clear. We're still working on it. Thankfully, 2 states recently legalized, but A lot of times people think that California is the #1 pot policy state, but it's actually not so great.
You have a laser pointer on there too. That red button. Cool. So just skip to the next one. So, like I was saying earlier, the war on drugs really is a difficult topic to study by itself because it's embedded into so much other policy. And when we think about the war on drugs, we just wanted to maybe highlight a few of these. So, the war on drugs is a war on people of color. It's really an extension of Jim Crow. If we look at, the arrest statistics, and if we look at the people that are predominantly affected by it. It's also a war on the lower class. We're starting to see, for the first time, an increase in percentage of white prison populations, and that's because of the meth epidemic. Do you want to take it?
It's a war on young people. Students for Sensible Drug Policy, the organization that we were originally introduced to during the beginning of our anti-drug war careers, really works on a lot of issues that affect young people, like drug testing, like young people are denied access to federal financial aid when they're trying to get into school if they have a drug charge on their record. Young people are constantly targeted by police.
And it's also a war on the environment, from a lot of different aspects. You can look at cartels that are deforesting large national forests to grow cannabis surreptitiously. And you can also look at things like the CIA dumping tons, or DEA too, dumping tons of pesticides in Colombia to try to stop the spread of cocaine. But all they're really doing is poisoning US cocaine users and ruining the environment in Colombia. It does not, the profit potentials involved mean that nobody cares. You can take somebody out, you can spray pesticides, and it's not going to stop the proliferation of these things. So it really is a war on the environment. And then on the flip side of that too, if drugs were legalized, I think we would see tremendous beneficial advances in terms of hemp. Not only, but hemp is an incredibly bioefficient plant. It's much more efficient than paper. Some of the reasons why cannabis is illegal in this country is related to Dow Chemical feeling very threatened by hemp-based plastics as opposed to their petroleum-based plastics, and also the paper companies in America. But if we scroll back for a minute to the Revolutionary War, there was a point at which it was illegal not to grow hemp in this country as a farmer because so much of our our sales at the time for ships, ropes, important legal documents, they're all made from hemp-based products because they're so much more efficient and healthy for the environment. So, super interesting stuff.
And the war on drugs is a war on women. Right now, women, after they have their children, if their drug test comes up positive, then CPS will come in and most likely take their kid away, or at least try to. Basically, it's a war on all of us. Those 5 things that we just went through, they were totally arbitrary choices that we made. We can pick any one and any area of society and talk about how the war on drugs completely bails us. And we could go on, but we won't, for your sake.
Oh, yeah.
So the war on drugs is also the war on human rights. The war on the right to cognitive liberty. There are really cool shirts back there. That's plug. That talk about how cognitive liberty is a human right. The right for us to be able to think what we want. It's the most basic right we can possibly have. And here the government is trying to get into our minds and keep us from using certain substances that control the way that we feel or the type of things that we think. And I'm going to just show a little clip. Wait. So this was my boss at the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, Eric Sterling. He is an attorney, he used to work for Congress, and here he is talking about the human right to get high.
And the drug culture are part of our culture. When we think about popular music, popular culture, motion pictures. This is all being influenced by drug use, by positive drug use, by drug use experience. It's no accident that musicians use drugs. So that we have hikes, posters, drug users engage in rituals. Now I'm talking more in the case of sort of marijuana users, LSD users, MDMA users, ecstasy users. I'm not talking, we can talk about heroin injectors and their own rituals. And they have their own subculture. But this is about a persecution of a subculture. And it is a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community. So, young people want to go to a rock show, let's have the cops out there pat them down and arrest those who are carrying drugs that they use at the rock show. Going to a festival, let's set up the state police and set up checkpoints and harass them on bogus protectional stops. Article 27, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which the United States is a signatory and ratified in 1988, that everyone has the right to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. If LSD is not a scientific advancement, what is? If MDMA is not a scientific advancement, what is? How can we say, all right, those scientific advancements, well, those are culturally used, those are used by a deviant subculture. But yet we are prepared to lock up 1 million such people year after year in the name of this. That's a violation of human rights. You have a right under Article 19 to the freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. LSD is a medium. Marijuana is a medium. When people use drugs, they are using a medium to directly influence their minds or directly influence their emotions and their thought processes. You think, oh, it's okay to pick up some newspaper, because that's what they had back in the days of James Madison. But if you want to stimulate your neurotransmitters directly, where does this come from? And it ends up in being used as a persecution of a subculture.
That was my boss.
Cool.
I was very lucky.
Yeah, and I think, especially in a room full of people interested in entheogenic policy, where this really hits home for me is when we're talking about psychedelic drugs, we're talking about drugs that affect the mind. And to try to control or limit access to those drugs ultimately then is a form of mind control, and I feel that very strongly that this cognitive liberty issue, it's something that kind of gets swept under the rug a lot by drug policy reformers. You hear it a little bit from some libertarians out there, and sometimes they get called crazy, but I think that the cognitive liberty issue really is the core issue when we talk about especially entheogenic policy, because it's just such an important, having control over your domicile, over your mind, over your brain is such a fundamental human right, and it so often gets ignored in drug policy.
So what can we do about this? I mean, the drug war, it's a pretty big thing. One person isn't going to end it, although Obama said that we ended the war on drugs, just like that. Okay, Obama, thanks. That was easy. One thing that we can do is we can talk to our politicians. And I know that it's not exactly something that's always an exciting thing to think about, getting dressed up in a suit, getting rid of dreads, which is what I had to do. Sad times. And playing within the system can sometimes actually make a change. In 2012, I organized a group of students to go to the New Hampshire primary, and we asked the presidential candidates some questions about drug policy. So I'll just play a few really fun clips.
So I actually wanted to ask you a question. You're talking about like sovereign rights, and I really appreciate your sincerity and your response when you talk here. And I'm concerned about my own like personal sovereignty and the rights I have. What I'm also concerned about is my sovereign ability to put what I want on it. I'm confused about your inconsistency with understanding sovereign rights with gun control and other ways to pursue happiness, and how that does not match with my desire to use drugs. Can you explain that? Sure.
Well, there's a general belief for the last couple of years that people with drug-addicted citizens are not capable of independent citizens.
Independent of what?
They're not capable of exercising independent judgment. So if you look at cocaine and heroin addicts, that they lose the ability to be fully participating citizens.
That doesn't seem to match with the consistency of how many people seem to use drugs in this country. So I'm saying that there's well over the majority of individuals in this country use drugs or have used drugs. And what you're saying is that the majority of individuals are incapable of
So I'm saying even on those who have, the majority of them agree that they should be legalized.
What polls are you referring to?
Polls in terms of legalizing heroin and cocaine. Never been.
Oh, I was talking about marijuana.
I'm just talking about.
Okay, well, I hope that we can continue to have an extra conversation about this. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Gingrich. I'm a recreational drug user. Should I be arrested?
I know you shouldn't have to, what else should you do?
Sir, it's my understanding that there's a core conservative.
In the opinion that the federal will say that.
He really talks too much. Yeah, he just talks and talks.
As a champion of family values, very strong. You continue to destroy families by sending them out to prison.
Wow. Federal government doesn't do that.
Senator, how do you get Not true. Thank you so much. I'm a marijuana user. Should I be arrested?
Just keep your promise.
I feel I've been popping around from town hall to town hall, and I just really feel like you're a really genuine person. So I want to thank you for that. Governor Romney, on the other hand, I've had a really hard time with. He's, dodged questions. He's been ignoring people, and I haven't been really feeling that.
Well, notice everybody's allowed in. People who agree with me and don't agree with me. I really, and I'm sure I'll get some people
They
that
tried
agree
to
with
take
me.
the mic from me at this point, and I was like,
you're running for president, and you're accountable to all Americans, not just the folks who support you. And I understand they try to micromanage these events to make sure that just friends and supporters ask really nice questions. But I'm interviewing, if you will, for President of the United States in a general election. I'm not just trying to interview to try to win a primary. I want folks here to know that I'm capable of dealing with all of the issues, with protesters screaming in my ear, because that's the American experience. That's what democracy is all about, and that's why I believe that people say, why did you come to New Hampshire? Because you guys do it right here. And you deserve to see all the presidential candidates. You need to come up here and you need to face the people of New Hampshire and directly answer their questions. And from here to the events we've done in Hollis and in Northfield and some other places, we've taken every question we could until we ran out of time. And we didn't pick and choose, our friends. We picked everybody, and I'm not even picking anybody because Paul's going to pick me.
So my question.
Your question.
Then,
you teed up an easy one for me.
You deserve it. So I asked you a few days ago if I'm a marijuana user and if I should be incarcerated and arrested for that. You said that it's up to my state laws. I just wanted to verify that you are in fact in support of states figuring out their own drug policies.
Well, obviously state drug laws are the principal drug laws. I do have concerns about obviously drug use and its impact on our society. And so I would say that the federal government does have a role in making sure that drug use, that states don't go out and legalize drugs, that there are drugs that are hazardous to people, that do cause great harm to both to the individual as well as to society as a whole. And the federal government has a role in making sure that those drugs are not in this country and not available, and that people, who use them illegally are held accountable. Ideally, states should enforce these laws, but the federal government has a role because it is a public health issue for the country.
Oh, this guy was my favorite.
Industrialize hemp. Okay, great.
Okay, so he has no idea. We conclude that Metron is unaware of what industrialized hemp is. That's our first set of questions. It's an education, uphill battle from here, but we're starting point. Mr. Sweeney.
Hi, how are you doing? I wanted to ask you, are you in support of arresting medical marijuana patients?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you in support of arresting medical marijuana patients?
Arresting?
Yes.
Arresting?
Arresting.
I'm in favor of having the law not allow illegal marijuana.
So you're arresting?
How are you? It's been violence in Mexico. It's time to go win and losing the war on drugs. Good luck, man. Hi. How are you? Good luck. Come on, Randy, answer the question. Please. Good luck.
Really curious.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Next quick photo while we're talking. Right there. Let's look that way. Great. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Good luck, guys. We got to stop the demand here in this country.
Do you think, excuse me, Governor, do you think the drug war is working? Governor, please answer my question.
Thank you. There's a full answer, and I'm just in a photo line like this. So come, look on my website to see my help out. There's nothing on his website.
So after a few days of chasing down all of the other candidates, we end up with Ron Paul. And it was kind of a really nice way to wrap things up. You know, he's definitely really good on drug policy, at least.
Paul, why do you think other candidates aren't talking about drug policy?
Why they aren't?
Why aren't they? We've been trying to interview them all week and we've gotten some answers.
I think they're easily intimidated, and they think that people are going to hold it against them if they talk sensibly about drug policy. Yet I think they're about 20 years behind the time. I think prohibition of anything doesn't work. I think we should prohibit is violence.
Completely agree. I'm with Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and a lot of our members fully support it.
We sure could use it.
Thank you.
Irina's so, what's the word I'm looking for? Timid when it comes to talking about the importance of this work. I think that this on-the-record work that you guys did, it got picked up by several major media networks. We saw that stuff on CNN, on all kinds of broadcast media. We saw articles written about that work, and I think that even just getting, all 8 Democratic primary candidates when Obama was first running were on the record about their marijuana policy, and that was in large part due to Irina's work and Students for Sensible Drug Policy's work, and I think that is an amazing feat, and I think that also the training that we do, every year we have 400 or so students, and it's growing, of course, gather at our national conference, and and Irina helps show these kids how they did it and how to get these candidates on the record. And on the record training is really a beautiful thing, and actually, it's not always easy, and how you ask the question makes a huge difference. And I think that it's great that to see students, learning these sort of cutting-edge storytelling and question-asking techniques that sometimes corporate CEOs go to retreats and pay thousands of dollars to learn, and here we have students learning them from other former students, and that's just a beautiful thing. So thank you for your service.
Well, and it's funny too because I have so many stories to go along with how we exactly figured out the best way to ask questions and really get in there. Because I mean, we were only there for a few days, and we got every one of the candidates, of the major candidates, on video talking about drugs. It was a pretty big deal. I honestly was not expecting that, but we had all these different methods. Like the last Romney video that I got, I was next to this family who was really excited about seeing him, and they had an extra Romney poster. And I like really got into it. I was like, wow, I'm just so excited to see him. Do you happen to have an extra poster for me to have him sign? And they're like, oh, absolutely. And I made friends with the photographer behind me and was like, oh, wow, you're gonna get such a great shot of him. I just can't wait. This is gonna be great. So by the time that he came out, they were like pushing me out in front of him. And his security guards by that point knew me, and they were trying to kind of like step in there. You can see in the videos, they're like, go, take it, Romney. Come on, it's her again. And at the same time, I'm like trying to get my cell phone on, and it's dying, and I'm like, eh. But anyway, it was really fun and really awesome. So I really recommend that everyone gets politicians on video, whether or not it's, you know, it doesn't have to be presidential candidates, but it can be like local politicians too. No. Okay. And you know, starting an SSDP chapter is definitely a great way to get support if you do want to work on drug policy issues. Starting one or joining one, there are already a bunch around.
Tell your college friends.
Yeah, tell everyone. I mean, SSDP completely changed my life. Not to mention that probably like 95% of my best friends are somehow related to SSDP now.
There's a lot of SSDPs.
A lot of us, thank you, Daniel. A lot of SSDPs, thank you. That was on video. So with that, I mean, start local, start really local. A great part of what SSDP does is they start with college chapters. You know, what's going on in your college. I worked on Good Samaritan policy campaigns at the University of Maryland, and that was a lot easier to start there as opposed to starting with the entire state of Maryland. We could actually talk to the people who are representing us. We could talk to our president and make a big stink out of it because we're giving them money. And I mean, we even collected signatures from parents and calculated how much money all of their signatures represented. And we actually ended up passing a Good Samaritan policy that covered alcohol, and they're working on covering all drugs now. But start local. You can really, really make a change, like locally, and it can have a huge impact. Like with Good Samaritan policies, that will actually save lives. And then share your stories. I mean, with psychedelics especially, I think we all have a lot of stories to share. A lot of stories about how maybe psychedelics aren't the scariest thing in the world. Maybe they don't make you go crazy and jump out of windows. Maybe they have some therapeutic healing effects. I don't know, maybe. If we can share our stories, if we're in a position of power where we're actually able to come out and say, hey, you know, actually my experience with that substance was really positive and really helped me in my life, then that's going to create a cultural shift. A cultural shift that will then hopefully change the policies to even them out.
And I think, you know, the drug war being a war that really it's a social justice war. You know, us as anti-drug warriors, we're really fighting for what's just and what's right in the same way that I think, you know, the women's rights movements, the civil rights movement, the gay rights movements, all for what is right, and they fought against an oppressive incumbent regime. And you know, literally, you know, a decade ago, it was illegal to be gay in this country. It was illegal to have gay sex, much in the same way that it's illegal to possess and use drugs. And we saw, you know, during World War II, I know as an engineer, Alan Turing, who invented, you know, a large amount of cryptography and computer systems theory, very important at breaking the German codes that were being used in that war, and possibly led to us, or one of the main factors why we won the war, was due to this man. And, you know, he was gay, and he was a member of the British military, I don't know what they call him. But he was forced to undergo both injections of hormones to try to make him not gay. He was ostracized, he was treated like he was a sick, diseased person. And you know, it's just amazing to me to see how we can have such an influential figure, you know, be treated so horribly in that time period, much in the same way that we see the atrocities of the drug war of today. So I think that coming out is just like it was an important thing in the gay rights movement. Where now suddenly, you know an uncle, a cousin, a brother, a friend who is gay, and it puts a face on this story, and it makes it very real. And I think in the same way with drug policy, we need to put a face on ourselves and talk about the fact that you know, entheogens have touched our life in a beautiful and positive way. But not only, you know, I mean, some drugs, you know, can cause problems, and I think we should talk about that too, you know. At least then we will break down this, all of this false and inaccurate information that DARE teaches us. You know, I mean, as a student who went through the DARE system, you know, one of the most important lessons I had to learn was that educators can lie to you, and so it's tough.
One of the few things I remember about DARE is that there was this question on an exam that said, what does DARE stand for? And everyone in the class got to it around the same time, and we all burst out giggling because one of the options was drugs are really expensive. And our teacher, our cop teacher, had to interrupt and say, it's not C, moving on. Good times. Don't worry, shit's getting better.
So when we talk about Obama and what he's done for drug policy, I think there's really only one thing I can point to that's positive. And that is the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010. It's the only pro-drug policy reform bill that I think he signed into law, really, that had a major national effect. And basically this reduces the sentencing disparity for crack cocaine. So it used to be that gram per gram, a gram of crack versus a gram of coke, a gram of crack would have gotten you about 100 times worse of a prison sentence than a gram of cocaine, because of course, white people use cocaine. And they lowered this disparity from 100 to 1 to, I believe, 18 to 1. Yeah. So, you know, 5 times better, still 18 times worse. A little less racist, yeah. Reminds me of the 3/5 compromise. But you know, policy goes this way sometimes, and it's an evolutionary thing. Yeah, sure. The clicker. Okay. So, seeing as how there's a lot of people in the room interested in entheogenic policy, I will breeze through this because I'm sure you guys know this, but MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, has spent over $12 million on psychedelic research. This is amazing. There are people in this room probably that never thought they would see entheogenic research reemerge. And after decades of bans, we're finally seeing the first, you know, peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. MDMA is approaching its end of phase 2 meeting, which means that MAPS will be going before the FDA and moving into, hopefully, phase 3 of the clinical trials for MDMA for treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that means that in the next, you know, whatever, 5-10 years, hopefully, we will see MDMA become a legal pharmaceutical. And that will mean the first rescheduling of a drug down the drug schedule. This has never happened before, right? Things tend to only get added to the schedules. Of course, the drug schedules are what controls how legal, what the penalties are for drugs in our country federally. Schedule 1 is considered to have no medical benefit and high potential for abuse, and it goes all the way down. And the pharmaceuticals tend to be, I think, 4 and 5, maybe 3 a little too. So, you know, it'll be very interesting to see what is going to happen. This will be an unprecedented moment in history when MDMA is descheduled or lowered down the schedule. The first human study in 15 years into the therapeutic use of marijuana was completed by MAPS with $1 million in funding from NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which historically is the government agency that is really tasked with the mission of showing how drugs are harmful. NIDA has tried a lot to, for instance, there have been at least 5 NIDA-funded studies that I've read that try to link cannabis use to causing cancer, and they all come back either inconclusive or actually the opposite effect. So, yeah, their response is to bury it. So another thing that I think is really interesting is that cluster headache research using psilocybin is being developed by researchers at Harvard Medical in conjunction with MAPS. And of course, cluster headaches are a really severe medical issue, worse than migraines, sometimes called suicide headaches. If you've ever known or seen someone with them, it's really a painful and incredibly scary thing to witness. And I actually have a friend in New York that suffers from cluster headaches, and she uses psilocybin-containing mushrooms about once a year illegally as a treatment method, and they seem to abate her headaches for about a year. And previously, I mean, there were weeks at a time where she couldn't leave the house, you know, because sun and everything would, and she'd have an oxygen tank, and that's kind of the treatment methodology of today is beta blockers and oxygen, which doesn't really work that well. So it's really an amazing thing that it, you know, stops it for a year. And then also in psychedelic policy, we see MAPS put out an RFP last year. I'm not sure if that moved anywhere. Maybe some people in the room know, but to conduct trials on ibogaine, which is amazing because ibogaine, as many of you may know, has some very promising potential for treatment of opiate addiction. Not only for the trauma that opiate addiction can cause, like a PTSD-style treatment, but also physically at abating the withdrawal symptoms, which is an amazing fact. Psychedelic use in the US is now at least as common as it was in the 1960s. So we're only going to see more and more interest in psychedelics over the next several years. And I think that our culture, our community is hungry for a way to express that, to discuss it. And we're only beginning to see organizations step in to fill that need. You know, I think that the sort of very visible areas of entheogenic culture and policy is just the tip of the iceberg, the thin edge of the wedge. And it'll be really, really interesting to see how this changes things. The UDV, an ayahuasca drinking church from Brazil, has a chapter, I guess, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that was recognized by the Supreme Court in 2006 as being able to use ayahuasca for religious purposes pursuant to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which of course allows Native Americans to use peyote. So, you know, this is a very promising thing that our courts are still ruling in favor of religious freedom of psychedelics. You know, ayahuasca, which is a very powerful DMT-containing psychedelic, as I'm sure everyone here knows. When we talk about marijuana policy, of course, Washington and Colorado are currently working out the details of legal marijuana use after their ballot initiatives passed last year. This week, Washington approved 334 retail pot stores. Yeah, so that's pretty fucking awesome. October 1st, Switzerland decriminalized marijuana. They just were like, okay, and they did it, kind of out of nowhere. So that's pretty awesome too. And of course, last year, I believe, Uruguay announced that they were to become the first country to sell marijuana from state-owned stores. So Uruguay will be the first country to vend marijuana to its citizens. It's been decriminalized there for a long time, but access is something they haven't really controlled, and no country has really dealt with that issue of access to cannabis. You know, a lot of countries have decriminalized it. Of course, Portugal is a very famous example. 10 years ago, they decriminalized all drugs, and they've had some really beneficial stories in terms of organizations like the one you work for, Irina, getting out there and being able to reach addicts because now they don't fear the same prosecution and you know, legal consequences. And I think that increases treatment options for people, and it helps reduce the harms that these drugs are causing to people, which is a beautiful thing.
Pot is not legal in Amsterdam.
Yes. Yeah, actually, you know, a lot of people think that Amsterdam has legal cannabis, but it's really just a gentleman's agreement. It's a deal between the coffee shops and the police, and while the deal allows them to vend 5 grams or less to a person 18 or older at a coffee shop, it does not allow them to grow or buy more than 5 grams. So these coffee shops in Amsterdam and all over Holland have like a front door operation and a back door operation. And that still means that the only way to resolve disputes, you know, is not in court. So it doesn't really abate the problems that drugs can cause because of the profit potential. And in terms of cannabis policy, you know, the 2 blue states there have legal access for adults, and of course, Colorado and Washington. We have, Maryland has a research-focused medical marijuana law, which is really interesting, and a limited defense for patients. States that have medical marijuana and have removed jail time for possessing small amounts, in other words, medical and decrim, are yellow. We have states that have removed jail time, so decrim states are orange, and states and districts with medical marijuana laws are red. So we have a lot of states that have passed medical or decrim laws or all-out full recreational laws, and basically 20 states have legalized medical cannabis, and the District of Columbia at this point. In the next election cycle, we're going to see that move to over half, you know. Both on medical, and I think we're going to see some more ballot initiatives and or legislative attempts at recreational cannabis. So it'll be really interesting to see over half this country have access to legal cannabis after the next election cycle. And finally, you know, we were talking about coming out, and I'll hand this to you in a second, Irina, but I just wanted to kind of add, this was a really fun project I got to help out on a little, that some friends of ours put together, and basically we launched a website that showcases this change in tide of marijuana policy, and it's called the Marijuana Majority, and the logo there actually will change over time. So 50% support legalization of marijuana, 72% support no jail time, so decrim, and 81% of the population supports medical marijuana. So as those tides change, this will fill in, and the organization's logo will change, which is kind of cool. But we can see that already, really, we are the marijuana majority. The majority of the population believes in some form of legal cannabis. Just amazing stuff.
Yeah, someone's just got to make a psychedelic majority website. After Steve Jobs came out as an LSD user, maybe more will come out.
So I think we're going to do a panel, actually, rather than questions now.
10-minute break.
10-minute break?
5-minute break, something like that.
Cool. So thank you all for joining us. This was super fun.